So a slave is someone who is, life is controlled by the one who is their master. By controlled, I mean they dictate what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, what they can and can't eat, what they can and can't wear. So basically, all areas of their life are controlled by the one who controls them. Okay, so this time, 12 generations. There's a mentality that's created as time goes on and new kids are born. And now they're not born knowing what it's like outside of captivity. All they know is captivity. And everywhere they look, what do they see? Gods in Egypt. Everywhere. 2,000. That means they had localized gods that were over different areas. In fact, another thing we need to ask, what makes something a god? What makes something a god?
Power.
Power. What do you mean by power?
Authority. Power.
Power or authority over you. That makes something a god. So I want to just kind of walk through some of the gods in Egypt. Now we know some of them. What were they?
Ra.
Ra, which was
Sun.
the sun god. Think about where they lived. In the desert, right?
What's the sun?
They lived in the desert, and if the sun wasn't kind to you, you could find death. I've flown over that area. I flew over, when I was going to Saudi Arabia, I flew over Egypt and over the Nile. Nothing grows after about a quarter of a mile on each side of the Nile. It's like a big green snake with a brown stripe down its back. And after that, deadness. So, water, the Nile was a god. Had to keep that god at peace. Crocodiles were gods. Why? What could they do? They could eat you. They could take away your life. Serpents were gods. Why? They bite you and you die. And lesser gods, maybe?
Rats.
What?
Rats.
Rats, flies,
Beetles.
lice,
Brother.
darkness. Why would darkness be considered a god?
Give you fear.
If you've ever been out and it's dark, I went in a cave one time about a mile down in the ground, and we shut the lights off. There is a darkness that will curdle your blood. Because you can't even see in front of your face. You can't wave your hand and see your hand in front of your face, and you can't move. You don't even know where death, death could be at the next step, or it could be coming right upon you. You couldn't even see it. It's scary. So, a god is something that has power or authority over it. And so, they all had physical representations. And the reason I'm saying this is, Moses is writing to these people who had been schooled in the gods of Egypt. Now, most people go, well, they didn't really believe that. Well, if they did not believe that, when they went out to Mount Sinai, Moses had delivered, well, God had delivered them, and Moses was the leader with the stick, right? He brought him out. He got him out to Mount Sinai. He went up on Mount Sinai to talk to God and get some instructions. What happened with the people? They started, their knees started knocking, they got nervous and said, this Moses who led us out here is gone now, so Aaron, what do we want you to do?
Make us a god.
Let's all throw the jewelry in the pot. Let's boil it up, and we would need a god. What'd they make?
Golden calf.
Golden calf. Have you ever asked why a golden calf? Why?
Provider.
Fertility.
Because a cow is a provider.
Yeah, that's one. That might be one thing, but one of the things that a cow was in Egypt was a god of partying and celebration. But also they did something else. They didn't just make this god. They had Aaron cast it, and he made it, and of course he told the story like a 5-year-old. I'm just standing there, and it comes out of the fire. Like it just did it itself. But They made that, and they bowed down to it, and they said something about that golden calf. What did they say?
Brought them up out of the land.
Behold, Israel, this is your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt.
The attributes, just
Now,
deliverance.
one of the things that I think, when I'm thinking of these idolaters, something's screwed up inside of them. That is, their view, their understanding of who God is messed up. Wouldn't you agree? Because if they're bowing down to a cow that they made and calling it God who delivered them, that's really not a clear picture of God, is it? It's not an accurate understanding of God. Plus, they had a view of themselves. How'd they view themselves? As Egypt did. As Egypt did. And how did the Egyptians view the Israelites?
Slaves.
Slaves. So these people were used to being slaves. They had a slave mentality. And so they would go right back to what they saw in Egypt. They wanted Egypt. How many times did they say, you know, I'm dreaming of those leeks and onions. And I'm tired of manna. Manna pancakes, manna for breakfast, manna for lunch. I want some quail. And they would keep trying to go back over and over and over again, which means their theology, to use the big term, was messed up, right? I'm going to give you another term for theology. And that is God picture. Why is that important? The God picture, theology is kind of the big word. We're all studied and philosophical about it, right? So I'm trying to make it more accessible to us, and that is, what is a God picture? It's the way you really see God. The way you really see God. You can proclaim all the theology you want, but how do you see God in here? And one thing that you know is, if they were bowing down to a cow, who did they see as more important, themselves or the cow? Kind of really not a hard question, is it? The cow. Because the cow is considered a god, it had control over their life. Now you have 2,000 different gods. Your life is under tyranny. And especially if the gods are capricious and they can do whatever they want. And if they're moody, well, famine might be in the order. And now you got to deal with the god's moodiness, and so you better get all your grain out there and give a bunch of offerings and bow down to them and kiss their feet if they have them, to try to appease the gods. That's a mentality that's shaped over and over and over again. Mentality being the way that you think, the way that you understand. So, when we look at these Israelites, and we're trying to understand them, I used to go, what a bunch of knuckleheads. But I was a knucklehead. I didn't know how I saw God. In fact, I didn't really see him. I thought at one time I didn't see him because he wasn't there. This is really important because Moses is writing to this, so he has to do a couple of things. Moses, now in here I'm going to write and collect up what I've talked about. Moses is writing, we're going to say telling the stories to post-Exodus Israelites to deal with what problem?
The sin problem.
Okay, that's real catchphrasey. I need something clearer.
Their mentality.
To deal with
Their view of God.
Yeah.
their God picture. It is their view of God, but I'm using that term specifically for a reason. their God picture and their if I can say it simpler, and their resulting
Influence.
view / value of themselves. Why do I say that? What were they doing? I told you they had a kind of a twisted view not only of God but themselves. What were they doing? They were worshiping the cow. What do you mean by worshiping?
They were cutting themselves.
Okay, what else though? Cutting themselves? They were bowing down to this cow,
Hmm.
which shows that they had a view of themselves that they were lower than this cow god.
Wow.
And so their value of themselves was hinged upon how they knew God. That's an inextricable link. Our view of ourselves is based upon how we see God. And so he has to deal with their God picture because you can't even know who you are until you know who the real God is. Otherwise, you're going to get false views of God and you're going to get false information